Mrs. Finch notices nothing untoward on her walk to work, no sign that anything is wrong. The village pond where once witches were ducked is placid and still. Those who drowned there were the lucky ones. The church, where men of God pointed fingers, is cool and dim. The gate from the churchyard still needs a hefty kick to get it open. The path through the woods is no different on this day. True, the morning is dark. October has rolled in on a bank of fog, making the leaves drip and the sky promises a storm. Soon will be the time when doors are left unlocked, gifts for the dead lain on cold hearths. Mrs. Finch has neither the inclination nor the wit for noticing such things. We notice, though. We notice that she stoops more, as if carrying some weight. She's getting older, her joints must ache. We see how she favours her left leg. We notice places by the path where the branches have been bent back, as if someone or something has unfolded themselves out of the dark wood. Scuffed marks among the leaves below the old oak, as if someone has been dancing. We did dance there, some of us, though our toes did not touch the ground. Malevolent fungal forms have pushed up through the leaf mould. Useful, those. Maybe we should slip some into Mrs. Finch's basket. There's a smell of damp earth, of rot, and long dead things. Mrs. Finch approaches the cottage in the woods, tutting as ever at the overgrown garden. Her employer should get someone in to deal with it, she's always telling him. The trees lean in close, and the sun struggles to get through even during August. Briar and bramble encroach, and the apple trees hang low with rotting fruit. She unlocks the front door, calling out aloud, "Hello!" as she enters. No querulous response. This is not usual. Her employer is always awake early. She shrugs, moves through the dark hall to the kitchen to get the stove lit. A pot on. She draws back the drapes to let some light through. Our fingers rattle like twigs on the glass. Let us in. Or it could be the wind with its autumn song. Mrs. Finch isn't much given to imaginings, so she ignores it. We know this house. We have been here before in other times, alone, as he put us to questioning, frightened. We remember the things he did, the confessions extracted. We still feel the pain. It burns brightly in us, and so does our rage. This time, we are not alone. We glance at each other and take strength from it. Must still be asleep, Mrs. Finch mutters, and gets on with setting out the breakfast tray. She can't think of it being otherwise. We slide into the room, sideways through the open door, slipping a catch on the windows, uncoiling up through floorboards. We've been waiting a long time for this. We have been gathering. We whisper to each other, slivers of sound that only we can hear. A blackbird shrieks outside. Mrs. Finch drops a spoon and one of us giggles. Something happened to the girls in the village, and that something still lives just about in this house. She's not, we think, a bad woman, but she shuts her eyes to evil, looking quickly the other way so as to pay it no heed. She can then, in all truth, declare she is innocent. She's nervy. We can feel it in the clatter of earthenware as she sets out a cup. The silence is getting to her, and we look at each other, smiles cracking our faces. It has been a long time since we smiled. Mrs. Finch has worked for her employer for years. She is the only person he sees these days. The villagers turned their backs on him, but they fear him still. Otherwise, doubtless, they'd have burnt him out long ago. "Just doing my job," she says, whenever asked how she can stand it. "Innocent until proven guilty and all that." That's a line straight out of his lying lawyer's mouth, and she knows it. The villagers know it too, but they'd let the tide roll straight over them and said nothing, were complicit. Mrs. Finch has finished arranging the tray. Still no sound from upstairs. She is spooked now, twitching at every creak of the old house. We rattle along the wainscot. We shake dust from the drapes. A shaft of autumn light illuminates it like a prayer. We see Mrs. Finch stiffen her resolve, shake her head at her own foolishness. She picks up the tray and goes out into the dark hall, ascends the stairs, her tread heavy. We follow. Our nails scratch along the dark wood panelling. Our feet trip-trap up the polished stairs behind her. Our cold fingers reach out to touch her hem, catch her dress. She hurries her step, fumbles with the latch to the bedroom, sets the tray down with a bang. We huddle by the doorway, not daring to enter. We don't want to get too close, not just yet. The man in the bed stirs. He's been dreaming again. We know all about this. We thread his nights with dreams, bad ones. We don't want him sleeping easy. Not like you to sleep in, says Mrs. Finch brightly. Are you quite well? He glares at her and she drops her eyes, mindful of her place. Her employer hauls himself upright out of the tangle of the bedclothes. We can see from his face that his bones are aching with the effort. Mrs. Finch breezes around the room, a determinedly cheerful expression on her face. She busies herself with the fire, adding more cold. Getting cold now, she remarks. Her employer grunts and sips his tea. Mrs. Finch is coaxing a flame. One of us, the bravest, has eased herself into the room. She traces pattern of ice on the window panes, and the fire won't catch. Is the chimney blocked? Asks Mrs. Finch, peering hopefully up it. It was fine yesterday. She uses the poker to prod at the flue and then shrieks as the crow tumbles out. The room is filled with smoke and burning feathers and decay. Mrs. Finch's employer coughs and curses. Open a window, goddammit! And Mrs. Finch rushes to obey. We are braver now, sidle closer. Our breath steams phantoms in the air. She fumbles with the catch and we are right behind her, our fingers tangling her hair. She shrieks again as the window flies open and the coldness rushes in like a curse. We would like to push her out, watch her head smack open on the stones of the yard below. Calm yourself, woman, her employer bellows, and Mrs. Finch stifles a sob. Get out! Mrs. Finch is down those stairs like a scolded cat. We can smell her fear. We can hear the thuddity thud of her racing heart. Mrs. Finch's instinct should be to flee back to the village. To her credit, she doesn't. She just sets the copper boiling. Like we said, no imagination. Mrs. Finch's employer gets up and flings the rotting carcass out of the window. He brushes the soot off his hand. He dresses, slowly, fingers fumbling at buttons. His face betrays no terror. We are going to have to work harder. He casts a look at his unmade bed and leaves it. We flutter behind him like dead leaves, unsure but wanting more. He moves slowly downstairs to the front parlour where Mrs. Finch has lit the stove. He settles into an armchair and picks up his Bible. He likes to keep it close, as if the good book can protect him from our wrath. We, meantime, perch in various places about the room and look him over. He's much older now, face deeply lined, hair almost white. His teeth are yellowing, his skin looks grey. He's lost a lot of weight. He still carries an air of authority, and we understand why people fear him. We think back to our childhoods, long golden days of summer when it never rained. Our families were happy. Neighbours were close. We looked after each other during the hard times and celebrated the good. We trusted in God. Our church, a sanctuary with the names of the dead carved into stones or painted onto boards, reminding us of the promise of heaven. The wooden angels of the roof trusses bent over us as we prayed, their eyes carved open in watchfulness. They must have turned their backs when he came here. Mrs. Finch rattles in with a pot of coffee for her employer. Despite the stove, the temperature is dropping. She brings him a rug for his bony knees. He doesn't thank her. Interfering hag. We bare our teeth at her and hiss. We want her gone. We send eddies of dust around the room. We snuff out the stove. We tip over the coffee pot and we slam the windows open. We claw at her apron strings and shove at her legs. A bowl from the garden, a sudden gust of wind. It lifts our torn petticoats and winding sheets. Others are out there, sisters, waiting in the dark woods to trip a fleeing woman, to torment her so she never returns. Mrs. Finch, her bravado gone, her disbelief shattered, runs from the house as if all the furies from hell are after her. She'll find little succour in the village and she won't ever come back. We are the girls who never came home. We are the pretty ones, the shy ones, the ones who love life. We are the ones who laugh, who dance, who sing. He looked at us and saw only sin there. He named us. And when you name a thing, it becomes a thing. And our families who loved us looked away, paralysed by fear. Friends and neighbours turned on one another. Accusations were made. Long dead disagreements were resurrected. He picked and he poked, and his fine lawyer's questions turned us into knots. And he is now all alone. Our retribution can begin. One of us draws closer, runs a frail finger across his cheek. A muscle in his jaw tightens. She strokes his straggy hair, gentle first, then twisting hard. A low groan from his bloodless lips. Now we are getting brave. We inch closer. Another insinuates herself onto his lap, squirms there, laughter in her eyes. We coil around him, whisper in his ear, words of lust, of filth, words we learnt from him. Words we heard from the pulpit where our families, shocked at the profanities, closed their ears to our weeping. His crabbed hands clutch harder at the good book, as if mere paper and words could save him now. We breathe frost onto his papery skin, and we smile at each other as we do it. There is no mercy in our hearts. Our chests are hollow, all kindness burned away. We will make him suffer. We have promised ourselves that. We are the lost girls. Alice Tanner, sewn into a sack and drowned in the pond. Lizzie and Ellen, sisters whose only sin was the tossing of their curls and the sideways looks they gave men. They loved to dance. He made them dance all right, on the end of a rope, looped around the high branch of the oak tree. Janice, whose voice during service was so beautiful that folk cried. She sang finely even as the cord was knotted around her neck. We were children, and he made us bleed in places we couldn't even comprehend. Burned girls, broken girls, girls with no voices left, vengeful girls, girls who have waited patiently, girls who finally become corporeal and enfold him into an embrace.
Thank you, Jo. That was fantastic.